We're here with Dan Jones, the author of The Fall of the Plantagenets and the Rise of the Tudors. We're here to talk about your latest book that just came out yesterday, The War of the Roses, Fall of the Plantagenets, and the Rise of the Tudors.
I like that you got Plantagenets right, because a lot of people struggle with that.
I know my British history, especially royal.
Okay, well, you're good. Fall of the Plantagenets, yeah.
Fall of the
Good
Plantagenets. So this is a follow-up to your last book, The Plantagenets.
Yeah, so the two of them, they work together. So the Plantagenets started with the rise of the dynasty, 1120, the book kind of began, the dynasty, Henry II, first of the Plantagenets, a rise, 1154, and then we went all the way through to 1399. Big moment in Plantagenet history, deposition of Richard II by Henry IV. This book picks up 20 years later, okay? Think at the beginning of the movie, 20 years later.
Yeah.
And we start with the marriage of Henry V, the greatest of all the Plantagenet, the medieval kings, getting married to Catherine de Valois in France. And then, so that's kind of the high point, and then what we see is this kind of unfolding tragedy, the collapse of the dynasty and the rise of a new dynasty, which should never have been anywhere near the English throne, the Tudors.
Right.
Who are the Tudors? But they're much more famous than the Plantagenets to most people. This is where they came from. This is kind of the origin story of the Tudors, as well as this kind of spectacular collapse of the Plantagenets during the Wars of the Roses.
Why were you drawn to the subject?
I suppose it started by accident. I guess like 15 years ago, almost to the day, 15 years ago, I started studying medieval history. I had chosen medieval history at university in Cambridge, England, for no other reason than I didn't know what to choose, and I sort of looked at medieval, that sounds all right. But blind luck, I fell into the great medieval school at Cambridge. Some brilliant medieval historians, led by Christine Carpenter, the professor. I was taught by Helen Castor, who's another great medieval historian working today. She just wrote a great book about Joan of Arc. And just kind of kept on with the period and got really, really fascinated. I mean, I'd studied a lot of Tudor history before, and it was kind of amazing to go back and get into these stories that I had name recognition, let's say, that I didn't know, and I don't think a lot of people know very much more about. So we're talking about Henry II, Thomas Becket, Magna Carta, 100 Years' War, Peasants' Revolt, Black Death, Wars of the Roses, all of this stuff that you might go, oh yeah, I heard about that, but didn't necessarily know just how dramatic, just how exciting those stories were. So over the course of the last 5 years, when I've been writing this kind of Plantagenet cycle, these two big books telling the whole story, it's just been thrilling to kind of get into all that detail and present it as an exciting narrative history.
Where do you do most of your research?
So I'm based in London. We have great libraries in London. We are blessed to have the British Library, which is obviously a fantastic resource, a lot of original manuscripts. We've got the London Library. I know a lot of the authors you talk about the London Library and what just a beautiful, kind of relaxing, very well-stocked library it is. It is a great place to work. It's kind of a who's who of all the British historians, because we all work there. We have the National Archives, stuffed full of original records. There are archives all around the rest of the country, but what's changing now about doing history is so much of the kind of manuscript collections and library collections, particularly from, let's say, the 19th century.
The private ones?
Not necessarily private ones. I'm talking about big public institutions and libraries, say on this side of the Atlantic, who might hold manuscripts, who certainly hold the printed editions of correspondence of legal records, of government records from the Middle Ages. All of this was printed in the 19th century. Well, now it's out of copyright, it's been digitised, so I can sit at my laptop at home and have access to all these books that otherwise would be, at least a trip to the British Library away, and in some cases a trip to the US away. So that whole world of how historians are working and how we research and how we access the materials is changing, and it's opening up. It's meaning that more people can do it, which, I think that's great.
In reading the book, it reads almost like a novel because of all of the excitement, tragedy, romance too. Why write this instead of a fiction novel?
Why write history instead of fiction? Well, I mean, I'm a historian. I think I know a lot of historians write novels. I think for me, personally, the idea of writing a novel is still slightly terrifying. You know, it's a step off the edge, you know.
Okay.
However, I mean, I love reading history, and one of the things that always frustrated me a little bit about reading history was that a lot of it, to be kind, is not enormously engaging. Or
You mean it's
well-written.
dry?
It can be dry, and it has that reputation.
Yes.
And that really frustrated me. That why make it up when the truth is so exciting? And if the truth is so exciting, why write it in a dull way? What I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to do in all of the books and the style I'm trying to create is rigorous, academic, properly researched, accurate history that will feel enjoyable and familiar to the readers of historical fiction. It has that narrative shape. It has that dramatic arc. I read a lot of screenwriting books, okay? The technique-wise, I mean, it is an art putting together a history that is both accurate, and you want to turn the next page, you want to read the next chapter. But that, for me, is how history should be written. That's where history came from. Look back in the 19th century, or even the late 18th century, you look at the great historical writers of the past, let's say Gibbon, Trevelyan, Macaulay. There is a tradition that goes right up to David Starkey, who taught me at Cambridge, of writing engaging, brilliant history books that are narrative history. And it's gone out of fashion a little bit. In fact, sometimes it's sneered at a little bit, and wrongly, totally wrong. I want to get back to writing history people want to read, and I don't think that's a wild ambition.
Oh, I think it's a great thing because, you know, as a reviewer, I read everything I can. And to read something that's engaging and keeps me in it while I'm learning things that I didn't know is just wonderful. Because then I can say, I know this. Do you know this?
You're absorbing information, you're enjoying doing it at the same time. I mean, right from, I got young kids, you know, they're not even quite studying history yet. My eldest is not even 6 years old. But when she does, I know kids want to be engaged. They want to have these stories told, and you want to absorb the information through fun, through enjoyment. That doesn't change when we suddenly become adults. No one, I don't think, walks around thinking, I want to read a really serious, difficult academic history book because I want to feel clever. You know, I want to do.
You'd be surprised. There's people like that.
That's snobbery. That's snobbery.
It is. I agree.
That's snobbery.
There are people like that.
And the one thing we've got to remember as historians is that our genre is not as popular as historical fiction. Why? Because it's usually worse written. Shouldn't be. The truth is just as exciting as fiction. A lot of historians sort of look down their noses at historical fiction. I'm into drawing readers out of historical fiction into history.
We'll be right back with Dan Jones.